everyone, and welcome to, wow, this is June already, our June/X event where we're going to be focusing on behavioral and mental health. I'm Fran Ayala-Somayajula. I'm the Global Lead for Population Health and Patient Engagement at HP. It's our honor to be hosting you here tonight, and we have a wonderful lineup. I want to make sure that I do a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. And we'll begin that by just reminding you that through those doors, there's a second set of doors through which you can have access to the restrooms. And in the back, there is tea and coffee as well for anyone who needs it. And we're going to go ahead and head on to the next slide. So before we do that, I want to remind you of this beautiful packet that all of you have. If you didn't get one, make sure you do. We've got some fantastic materials, which will be explained throughout as well. They're included. And also coming up in the month of September, we'll be focusing on precision health. And then later in the year in December, we'll be looking at longevity. So we've got a great lineup of programs, and we hope to see you all out for those as well. Okay. Yeah, thank you. I always love to start off by reminding people of the history of HP. Folks often forget that HP has over 50 years in the healthcare industry. And we started off with the area of cardiovascular ultrasound and moved on many years later to form a company called Agilent, which was spun off in the 1990s. But it's still in our DNA today. In fact, the first human genome was sequenced on HP compute power. And even though we have changed over the years, our commitment and investments into the healthcare industry have led us to be the leading technology manufacturer within this space. So we always just want to remind you of that. And with that comes our promise around the technologies that we are introducing. What's near and dear to me about what we're talking about today is the fact that HP technology is being used to look at the whole individual and being able to apply that in areas that go across the continuum of care, everything from bedside to bedside. And a great example of that is in the area of virtual reality. Here you'll see a case study where, in fact, just not too far north of us at Providence in Portland, Oregon, we introduced the virtual reality technology to actually help with the management of pain amongst pancreatic cancer patients, reducing the at-rest pain of these patients by over 30%, reducing the use of opioids by 20%. And we're seeing the adoption of this technology in many arenas within the care, as well as the diagnosis and the education of patients. So I'm really honored today to be able to be with a distinguished panel of guests. And it is my great pleasure to now introduce you to Dr. Archana Dubey, who is the Medical Director for HP Global Employee Health Centers. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Fran. So my job today is to share our mental health challenge. I'm a practicing physician, and what keeps me up at night is a line that my mental health or psychiatrist, physician, teacher, or professor told me that you will be the last person that the patient will see before they commit a suicide. And so I want us to make this personal today when we are having this conversation, because I thought we will be having a fun event and a great event, all positive, but I thought I'm going to start with the negative. In the light of what we just saw last couple of weeks, the 2 people we lost, folks who are well accomplished, doing work that they're passionate about, fulfilling their life with giving back, you would think nothing could go wrong with them, but they ended their own life. So I would like us to challenge ourselves, because I see this challenge every day. There you go. I see the challenge in my patients, because in mental health, behavioral health, it's not like somebody hurt their knee and then they're going to look at the doctor and they will get a second opinion and they'll find what are the treatment options, and they can get engaged with the doctor and make a very evidence-based and effective solution for them. In mental health, the patient is not an advocate for themselves. They are not either compromised in their executive skills. And that is our first challenge. Their emotions their mood and their behavior is compromised. So that is why engaging the patients that truly need our help is becoming a challenge. And the second one is the provider. The providers are not well equipped. They have 10 minutes or 15 minutes with these patients. They are more incentivized to write a prescription and get out of the room and document in the chart and do the billing and move on with their life, and not truly sharing with the patient what are the other options that they have that they can avail. And they do not know what exists out there on the horizon. So today I would like to bridge that gap between people who are the consumers and the people who are innovating. So that would be good. And then the third part is very interesting, is the health insurance. And HP is a self-insured employer, so we are kind of a payer in space in a way. And insurers, again, are also incentivized to cover the most effective treatment. So the most effective treatment, the shortest time, becomes the pill. And it doesn't become all of the technologies that we are now coming up with in emerging technologies. Besides that, they do not know the method of adoption, so they don't know how the reimbursement would go. Is this an FDA-cleared device? And so I'll have a lot of questions with the second panel. And so I'm looking forward to the panel discussion from the investors and then also the panel discussion from the innovators. I would like to introduce now my co-host, Bambi, who is going to share some data.
Yeah. Thank you. So the challenges that Archana articulated have not gone unnoticed. Venture capitalists are pouring investments into this space. You can see these are numbers from CV Insights. So 2018 looks to be a record year, maybe $500 million. That's twice the amount that was invested in mental health and wellness last year, and it's the 5th year in a row that we're seeing money going into the sector. Now, you can see how CV Insights clustered these companies: telemedicine, brain training, wearables. But as I took a deep dive and tried to research and understand this industry, I wanted to understand where these VCs, where we were investing with regards to the challenges that we face. So we need new prevention solutions. So we are seeing a lot of wellness and self-help apps. We're seeing a lot of services integrated with primary care providers. We need new diagnostics. The PHQ-9, lousy. That's my opinion. I think we could do a lot better with regards to diagnosing, not just the symptoms, but the root problem. So, and also those are they're subjective self-assessment tests, and now we're moving to a more objective type of tests like digital phenotyping. And then there's a slew of new treatment modalities, access to licensed therapists, community, actually that's relatively new, I'm excited about that area, medical devices, wearables, and digital therapeutics. So as I tried to create a market map, and everyone here has that, I wanted to understand where are we putting our investments across this mental health to mental illness spectrum, from people who are well-functioning to people who are have serious clinical conditions. And you can see, and the above half shows a lot of platforms that are giving access to therapists, licensed therapists. And the bottom half, really, they're more sort of self-directed tools or new technologies that are prescribed by physicians. And some of these new technologies are, AR, VR, lots of smartphone usage, wearables like Think, and then moving along the line to the right, we have therapeutics that is really going for hard clinical severe conditions with CBT tools. But Pear and Achille, they're both interesting because they really are trying to replace prescription medications. I think a lot of these companies are trying to do that, and I'm really excited to see that we have alternative solutions. So this is just a basis, give you a framework of the ecosystem, because really the experts are here, venture capitalists are here to talk about where they are investing and where they see opportunity. So with that, I want to open it up to our VC panel.
So just like we always do, we cannot introduce you better than you can yourself. So We can go one person on each table at a time. And what we would like to understand is why you started investing in this space, what your philosophy is besides also your background. So Amber, can we begin with you? And then we go to Liz, and then we kind of balance it out. Yeah.
Yeah, well, great to be here. Thank you for having me. It is, I keep looking at Lisa here because it is so odd that we're separated by gender here.
Boys have cooties.
Yeah. Do you want to switch? Lisa, let's switch. It's a little odd. Can we, let's mix it up.
Oh.
Let's mix it up.
We were hoping for a family feud
We
here.
were going to do a little bit of family feud, girls against boys type of thing. But, okay.
And in fact, you can go first.
Yes,
Brilliant. Well played. Well played.
Nice. Nice.
I have company here now.
All right.
Okay, perfect.
I think it's better this way.
Yeah.
Okay, you should be in the middle.
Sure. It took me a while. Okay. Hey, everybody. Ambar is obviously embarrassed about his background, so I'll cover for him a little bit here. I'm Lisa Suennen. I run GE Ventures Healthcare Venture Program. I started looking at mental health issues, well, long ago because of my family. You really should meet them. But officially, I actually joined a startup in the behavioral health space in 1989. And for those of you who are alive in 1989, even back then, this was a huge topic of conversation. Built that company up to about an $800 million revenue base. We took it public and we got acquired by Magellan. And so a lot of what you see is Magellan today, which is the largest provider of behavioral health services in the country, I believe, at this point, came from that original company. In my investing, 20 years now in investing, look at all sorts of mental health companies. We've only made a couple of investments, and one of the ones you saw up on the board, Neuronetics, is an investment in the GE Ventures portfolio. It is unique, or almost unique, in that it's a medical device to treat major depressive disorder, which is very uncommon. There's a couple other devices out there that are used to treat mental health disorders non-invasively as well. But we've looked at a lot of different things, and there's a lot to say about them, so we'll leave that for Ambar, though.
Hi there. So this is still right, even though
Yes,
we're not boys versus
absolutely.
girls anymore? Okay, good. So hi, everybody. I'm Liz Rockett. I am an investor with Kaiser Permanente's venture fund. And just briefly on the fund, we've been around for about 20 years. We invest broadly in things that are strategically aligned with or important to KP. So we have a pretty broad mandate. We really invest across everything from IT and digital to later stage services companies to clinical technologies like medical devices and diagnostics. But we have been, I mean, I think this will be such an interesting conversation because I think as many folks here on the panel know, you know, we're in a time when mental and behavioral health has become a very common topic of discussion in the venture world, and it's a little bit like motherhood and apple pie. We should be doing more, and there's so much opportunity. But I think from my perspective, we're in the very early days of what innovation can be in mental and behavioral health. I think, you know, Lisa's experience doing managed care in this arena is one of the few examples we have from prior to really the last 5 to 10 years of innovative ways of addressing things. So KP Ventures, we've invested in a few ways of expanding access, including Ginger.io and other tools that are more looking at ways to take methods or modes of treatment that we've long known work very well, but we rarely deliver at scale, like cognitive behavioral therapy, and investing in the companies that are digitizing that to create radical transformation and access to those sorts of treatments. And so Big Health is one of those in the cognitive behavioral therapy space. Omada, of course, is kind of the hallmark of that approach, although they're a little bit more focused, obviously, on chronic conditions. But lots more to talk about. We'll leave it there.
Awesome.
Back and forth.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Hubert Zajicek. I run Health Wildcatters. It's a healthcare seed accelerator in Dallas, Texas. And of course, in the course of how did we get into it, we invest in digital health and in medical device companies. And over the years, of course, I've run into some great mental health companies, mental health startups on the digital health side, of course. As far as the trends go, I think we talked earlier, Bambi, on the stigma and the reasons why things are different. I'm from Europe originally, so I had to learn that there's a differentiation between health and mental health. When I first moved here 20 years ago, I learned that my mental health coverage was gracefully up to $10,000 based on my health insurance. That's been removed now, and so that's one step. Another thing that is happening, and especially just the last couple of weeks being a sad reminder, is that we need to continue the discussion, the conversations around the topic, because there's still, even today, there's still stigma attached in many, many facets. And so as we move the ball forward on making a change and extending a helping hand and helping people, we have to realize that it's not mental health, it is living a balanced life. And I haven't rehearsed this, but I really think that viscerally, I'm a physician by training, and viscerally that's what it's all about, right? When 1 out of 3 people ends up with a depression or some sort of a mental health issue, the truth is it'll hit all of us, or if it's not us, then it's one of our loved ones, and within 20 years, easy. So what is it? It's about being imbalanced and responding in a way that really causes harm to us or our loved ones or our family. And so all of us need help in that department. All of us do. And so I think if we can wrap our brains around that, then we will embrace it more as a wellness agenda that has to be embraced, as opposed to a mental health issue that some people have. Surely not me, somebody else. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a good story here.
Hi, Stephanie Tilenius. I think I'm here as the entrepreneur provocateur for the panel. Bambi asked me to be on this panel, but I'm actually a founder and CEO of Vida Health. I have actually, I sit on a couple of public boards, and I have been an investor in the past, so I can maybe lend that perspective. But I will say, what we're doing is combining chronic care and mental health, because there's a lot of comorbidities. So if you look in the system today, someone who has diabetes and depression is 4 times more expensive. And they often need a combination of a diabetes management program, which we have, or a TPP program like Ambar, which we also have. But they often need CBT and a therapist. And so what we're doing is combining digital therapeutics and real telemedicine inside the app to actually get outcomes. And we're seeing a 64% reduction in depression, for example. And we're handling people who have diabetes and depression. So we think that I really believe the forefront of a lot of what everyone's talking about here is these digital therapeutics meeting people where they're at in a very personalized way and solving the mental health problem, where we all know that a lot of prescriptions are out there that are ineffective for a lot of people, and they're expensive, but only 20–30% of them are effective. And so hopefully digital therapeutics in the next decade will solve some of that.
Hi everyone, my name is Billy Deitch. I'm from Oak HCFT. We are a venture capital and growth equity firm that invests solely in healthcare and financial technology. I spend all of my time on the healthcare side, and everything that we invest in is focused on improving the quality or lowering the cost of healthcare in this country. In terms of behavioral health, we've invested in a handful of businesses, one of which is Quartet, another which is Axial, another which is US Health Fest, which is, you may not have heard of, but it's an outpatient behavioral health facility business. In terms of my own personal interest in the sector and in this sort of ecosystem, so my wife is a practicing clinical psychologist, my father-in-law is a neurologist, my mother-in-law is a psychologist, my wife's aunt is a psychologist. I have benefited myself and everyone in my family from psychologists. So
Thanksgiving must be crazy.
Yeah, well, things aren't left unsaid. Everything is discussed.
Talk therapy.
Good communication. It took me a while to adjust from my Midwestern background, but I actually love it. So it's something that I've become passionate about and love hearing about sort of ways that we are, as you said, destigmatizing this world, and there is not, a lot of times when we talk about mental health, behavioral health, it's about that person is, we see it now as sort of an illness that should be treated, and I think this is sort of what you were getting at, Hubert, whereas everyone in this room is crazy. That's something my father once told me, and he told me that to say, like, don't worry, even when everyone's life seems perfect, is what you were saying in the intro, everyone's life might seem perfect, but everyone has their issues, and there isn't a person who couldn't benefit from behavioral health. And so expanding access to just even people who maybe don't suffer from deep clinical depression, but just having that place where you can sit down and take a breath and understand what's going on. That's my long-term dream for what happens in behavioral health in this country. So.
I'm Ambar. I work at a venture capital fund called Maverick Ventures. We have our focuses on the healthcare sector, mostly in digital health, although we'll do some biotech as well, and then the other half is in technology. We've been keenly interested in the mental health space. I guess from a personal basis, just similar to Billy, my dad's a neurologist, so I kind of grew up with it. He had a radio show growing up where every Saturday morning at 9 a.m., and we grew up in rural America, so people would call in with their different various mental health problems, and my mom, my sister, and I would listen to the various people that we see at the local Kmart talking about to my dad on the radio about what's going on. And so we kind of grew up with it. I became a psych major in college, did my my research and my thesis in cognitive neuroscience. So I've taken a keen interest in the space, both from a family and educational perspective. From an investing lens, I've been interested in mental health in two discrete fashions, because I think the problem has been well stated by everyone here, and I don't think we have a great silver bullet solution for it. So my approach has been twofold. So one is look for new modalities that are I'll call it on the fringe of technology that may have an interesting approach for how to look for solutions to mental health. And so we've been seed investors and early investors in two companies. One is Limbix, which is using virtual reality to treat a host of mental health issues, think depression, anxiety, PTSD, things of that sort. And in a former life, I was a seed investor in Ginger as well, which is using data from your phone to understand if that's a leading indication of depression and things of that sort. That's on one bucket. And the second area that I've been interested in mental health is thinking about it holistically. I think my fellow panelists had a great point of we separate mental health and health all too often here, which is inappropriate. I think if you look at the data, folks who have mental health issues tend to have higher medical costs as well from a payer perspective. It's bizarre that we think about these in isolated fashion. So one of our most recent investments is in a company called CityBlock. CityBlock is a primary care focused company on the Medicaid segment, Medicaid and duals. And what they're focused on is holistic health. So think not just primary care, but having a therapist, thinking about the social determinants, what's happening at home, actually going to the home, looking what's in the pantry, because these things all have an impact on how people live their life day to day, how happy they are, how sad they are, if they get sick more often. So I'm really interested in both of those modalities, the holistic side and the tech side.
Like so many questions after everybody. Yeah, but it made me think about, and I just want to comment on what Hubert touched on, and actually the three men actually touched on, which was sort of life balance. We're all crazy. I did write a piece that was, it's not so much a stigma of mental illness, it's a stigma of a flawed life. I mean, let's just be real. We're all crazy and we're all flawed, and we can't express that to people, and as soon as it hits us, then we're like, oh, we're mentally ill. We're not mentally ill, it's just that's who we are. So I would like to understand, there is a problem, is that where does health and mental health come into play? Our diagnostics aren't there to really capture where these people are, right? I mean, they take a subjective self-assessment test. They're all kind of in, Hubert, you and I talked about this, they're all kind of locked into one group, but they have different varying, root causes. So what are we looking at? What are we investing in to help us differentiate between what's a healthy person just, dealing with life's vagaries and, what's truly somebody going down the path of clinical, severe clinical condition? Right,
and I think we do need to make one differentiation here, and that is, there is psychiatric illness. Okay, so I think most of us will agree that there's some well-defined psychiatric illnesses that need to be treated, and they're not self-diagnosed. They will be usually diagnosed by others because there's a severe aberration from normal behavior that is not even being discussed here. So we have that, and that is mental health, and that would be being diagnosed with cancer or heart disease would be similarly drastic. So that's a clear disease. What we're talking about here is really the rest of the spectrum, which is the whole realm of human emotion that can swing in all ways, that is still living a normal life, but as we have learned recently, and we all knew that, of course, but can lead to drastic results. And depression, of course, being the number one, but there's many other manifestations. So I think that area where a lot of us think, what is wrong with me? Why am I acting this way? Is probably a good point at which we should all think back of this panel when we were all diagnosed as being crazy, which is a good starting point. Everyone's different, everyone's differentiated, and life, as it turns out, is pretty crazy altogether. Now, when it has a negative effect on us in a way that we deteriorate as the norm in our family or in our social circles, then that's when others become concerned and start talking to us, right? Could be just like with excessive drug use or other illnesses and behavior that has such a detrimental effect on us that we ourselves don't maybe see it, but others see it and realize that something needs to come about. So I think in many cases you will have heard things from your family and loved ones for years. Back to your question on where do you draw the line? And then the question is, if you are in that bucket, what tools can you, and I'd love to see us all have tools at our disposal. If we all agree that we're all crazy, then we can all agree that we could have tools that help us along the way. And when we see things come off kilter, we could start counteracting or seeking help. And that would not be stigmatized. That would just be a normal thing. And removing those barriers, as in going to have to see someone or worry about your primary care physician, having to approach him or her about it. If we can remove those barriers and give us direct access, I think a lot of things can be balanced out.
So, kind of follow up to that question is, I see that your investments are more directed towards solutions of conditions and not so much on the diagnosis part of it. And I almost feel like that's the missing part. And I agree with you on we are all crazy. I actually put it a different way for my patients. I'm like, there are two kinds of people, one who is with a therapist, one who's not, who needs to be. So consider a therapist as a life coach if you don't have a condition, or a therapist if you do have a condition. So, but how do you come to that condition?
I somewhat take issue with the idea that patients can't self-diagnose some of these conditions. Now, we have to differentiate between schizophrenia and some bipolar disorder, things that are truly deeply biological conditions, and many forms of depression are as well. So doctors do diagnose these things. But on the other hand, for the more day-to-day models of anxiety and depression that people experience, I think people self-diagnose very well. They may not treat, they may not get treatment. That's a different question. Yeah. I think people know, by and large, pretty well, the same way most people can self-diagnose that they have a problem in their back, and that the diagnostic tools we have out there to say it's good or not good are equally bad, frankly. So I'm not sure the diagnosis is a huge problem. There are things like Ginger.io that have tried new models of using the sort of the passive sensing of your life to determine if you're
so like tapping
not in the normal, groove. But once again, that person who's experienced it has to decide they want to do something about it. I think that actually the biggest challenge is the treatment, is getting access to the right treatment, knowing who to call, knowing where to even, vet a decent therapist or drug or whatever, because a lot of times, the drugs don't work very well for most people, or they have to try multiple ones before they do. The therapists don't work well for most people. They don't match the first one they see. I mean, the treatment is a total crapshoot. And I think that is the bigger problem, frankly.
Well, yeah, go ahead.
And there's also access issues that are happening as well. I mean, so payers are notorious for not reimbursing mental health professionals at reasonable rates. Reasonable rates. And so then, then patients don't have access to them. There's folks, I know there's someone here speaking from Lyra, which is a great platform for, for the employers who will purchase Lyra for their employees, and we'll see that in, nice startups here in the Bay Area, but you don't see that everywhere in the country. But it's the right idea, right? Saying that this is important for our employees, our patient population. It makes them healthier, it makes them happier, it makes them more effective employees. There's platforms like Lyra, or like Quartet, which are, for similar to Vida, for comorbidity, right? And it's saying, these people, they're diabetic, but the reason they keep coming into the hospital is because they're depressed and they're not taking their insulin properly, right? So there's issues with access. And so these platforms that are providing access are huge, but then there needs to be, I think, just more fundamental shifts in the way that the payers think about it as well, and saying, okay, this is important for the overall cost of care for a life we're managing, and so let's also get them access to behavioral health professionals.
I think a couple of you guys wanted to answer this question as well, talk about the diagnostics, but I do want to touch on that, Billy, in terms of the economic incentives today. Some of them are pretty perverse, and so how are these new solutions making the economic incentives, driving caregivers to provide better care, because right now the incentives are off for them to provide the proper care. So, but did you want to respond to the diagnostic stuff, or did you want to get into that?
I'll try a little bit of both. We'll see how this goes. So I think the one thing I was going to add on the diagnostic question, so Ginger.io did start as a way to diagnose episodes of anxiety or depression simply based on how you're using the device that is always with you, your smartphone. Brilliant technology, such a thoughtful use case. The industry isn't ready for it, and that is largely because if you're thinking about diagnostic capabilities like that, you're assuming a provider with time and bandwidth to do that. And we talk about this all over healthcare, but I think in mental health in particular, we don't have a system that's structured with a sufficient access to get to all the people, never mind do extra hand-holding along the way. And I'm sure there's some providers who figured out how to do that as a system. I don't think we're quite ready. And that's where I would echo what's been said. Diagnosis, self-diagnosis, coming forward for treatment has a better shot of happening if access is radically increased. And that's what I think a lot of these players are trying to address. The other thing is stigma, and this kind of gets to that sort of where are folks coming up with ways to overcome some of the economic barriers or sort of the incentives to provide these sorts of solutions. One of the interesting ways, and for Vida, you probably have a similar experience with this, but the interesting ways I've seen of how do you get to overcome whether or not somebody will raise their hand and say, I have an issue, so that they come forward to care, and overcome the economic issue. And that's in a model that is run by a company called Able2, where part of their approach is just to identify in the claims, this person has recently had a heart attack, they've recently had a child, they've recently had any sort of life event that shows up in a claim. We can reach out to them and offer this service as just like a friendly thing that's not assuming anything about you, but just saying, hey, we know lots of folks who have just gone through this, find it to be a scary time, here's a service that you can chat with somebody and get help, so that it doesn't feel like you seem like you're crazy, do you need help? Instead, it's lots of people having the experience you just had go through something like this, and we have a service that can help. And that it gets right to the heart of what payers know to be true of folks who have just gone through this sort of episode may not be as compliant, they may not be sort of as attentive to their the way they should pursue their medical care if their mental health is not addressed. And so it's a way to target both the economic incentive as well as overcoming that stigma.
Yeah.
I was just going to answer your question about the economics and the incentives. So, I mean, people who have 1 in 4, 1 in 5 people have a mental health disorder, and if you look at the comorbidities between physical and mental health, it's very costly. So the payers and employers are all very interested in solving this problem. It's a very hot topic among decision makers, buyers. And there actually are changes in the reimbursement system. So CMS is now reimbursing for chronic care management. They're reimbursing for TPP. They're reimbursing for COCM is actually there's 4 codes for mental health now. So you're starting to see a shift. Mm-hmm. But it's just, I mean, we're working with, I can't say the name, but a very large employer. They had 4 suicides last year in one of their large call centers. And they looked at the costs associated with that and the productivity impact, and it's massive. And so they are doing everything they can to solve it. So there is really we hear it pretty loudly from the employer side in particular.
Are they getting reimbursed?
They pay for it. They pay for the service for their members.
Yeah, it's a standalone service for all employees that they will pay for. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'll add to that. So I think when we think about the economic side of it, and I think it ties very closely to the clinical side, I think there's 3 things that we're trying to solve for here. One is access, which people talked about. 2 is the efficacy, like how effective is that intervention, and 3 is durability. Like after the intervention, will it actually last, or will there be a relapse, or will you go back? I think similar in all of healthcare, particularly in mental health. In examples like City Block, one way that we're addressing that is we're taking full risk on these patients. We're taking full medical risk, and as per Stephanie's point, there's a lot of mental risk that's layered in that. And that's how we think about our ROIs. If we do have therapists on staff or behavioral health specialists that are going to people's homes and talking to them, how do we generate that ROI, and how do we make sure it's a durable ROI, right? Not just kind of a flash in the pan. That's how we think about it, right? We think as if this is an intervention that is lasting, and it is, and you do see it in the claims over time, then it's making sense. But I think all 3 of those elements have to be true. Like people have to access it, it has to be effective, and it has to be durable.
And I almost feel that part of access is also the trusted source where it's coming from. So either it is coming from a trusted source inside your house, which could be a spouse or parent, or it could be the doctor. And it's almost like it's coming from the care provider driving all of this. And what ends up happening is we are disincentivizing the care provider to spend that much time because they are paid on how much head count you're seeing in your office. So instead, if the payment system truly, our first of this series was the value-based talk, if our payment system truly shifts into the value-based and we are able to measure what a provider's impact on that patient's outcome has been in dollar amount, I think we would actually incentivize the provider to spend more time with the patient and become that trusted source to provide the physical and the mental health at the same time.
No, you're right. I mean, I just to completely agree with your point, one of the areas that is in healthcare that's actually been a leader in mental health research has been the VA. Because of PTSD and a whole bunch of other issues that our soldiers have when they come back. And hence the virtual reality stuff that they've experimented over the last 20 years to deal with it. But it is a trusted source for our veterans, is the VA. I mean, they go there for all their care, and it's not a perfect system, obviously. But they're comfortable going there, trying new things, and I think that, I mean, that's you're spot on.
But how many people in the room get their insurance from their employer?
Most everyone.
How many of you would call into your employer and say you're taking a day off because you're really sad? Yeah, you work for yourself. Okay. So that is the problem in a nutshell right there.
I think the stigma is
people don't trust their employer. They don't trust the payer. They don't trust the people who provide these services to them. They're worried about the data coming back to them, which it does. They're worried about their coworkers knowing about these things. I mean, it's very complicated. And I think even the terminology we use is problematic. Call it. I know it's technically correct, but disorder is a really negative word, right? And we talk about people when they're in their phase of having mental health problems as if they are damaged, and we would not talk about people who have heart attacks that way. So it's the language of it is really complicated and treacherous, I think. So I think until we address some of these issues, the access, not just the physical access and the financial access, which suck by and large, but the comfort with dealing with these issues. And I think one of the few good things that comes out of all of that public horrible stuff, all the suicides of people that are well known, is that it brings the topic out into the open. But 123 people kill themselves every single day. You just don't hear about them, right? So I think we need to figure out a way, and I don't know what it is, I wish I did, to bring this out into the open more, because it is so common, and it is not, and it is also, like all other medical conditions, intermittent throughout your lifetime. So just because you have depression when you're, a teenager, doesn't mean you won't get it. In fact, you are certain to get it again, when you are a parent and when you are older and all of that. It's like the flu. You're not going to get it just once in your life. And so I think we have to change the dynamic about how people think about these problems and make them more common and comfortable to discuss, or we're not going to get anywhere.
And I think actually the place where the ideal place where we end up, I don't know when that is that instead of looking at it like you need to go have this treated like your back's hurting or whatever it might be, instead we start to look at it like it's going to the gym. You do it to stay, and so then there's both, right? We talked about that.
From a preventive standpoint, you mean?
Just from a overall, I guess I didn't like that comment. From an overall, or that one, from an overall mental health perspective, just the idea that like there's people who there are chronic disorders or illnesses that need to be treated, but there's also mental wellness that will, and that's why there are a lot of companies that are, investing in that for their employees and providing those services because it'll keep them more. There's other companies that are like trying to provide financial well-being, services for their employees so they're less stressed out, so that they are more effective employees, right? All these things, just keeping their mental space better, so that.
Yeah, I was just going to say one thing that is taking off, Lisa, is mindfulness.
Is which?
Mindfulness.
Mindfulness.
And so all the employers are open to talking about mindfulness. And we do mindfulness-based stress management, but we also do a PHQ when you're doing that. And so we can detect if you have depression, and then we can move you into a CBT program. So I think mindfulness is like all the rage right now, right? So that's a conversation.
And it's like step one,
it's
right?
Like step one, and then you move into the step two.
Yeah.
And this is a 20-year journey, right?
How do you, it's sort of like what Lisa said, who's really going to raise their hand to say, I need mindfulness? It's great to have a solution, but you sort of have to have sort of a champion on the employer side to actually get this out there, because there are people who don't know they need it. So how do you work with the employers to actually use the service?
Mindfulness is all the rage. Like every employer wants.
An easy sell.
Everybody wants MBSM.
In the Bay Area.
No, even across the U.S.
No, across
even
the
across the
country.
U.S.
No, but that's where it's an innovative place, and that's okay for it to start in the Bay Area.
Yeah, no, but I'm actually saying it's true in the U.S. in general. I mean, you're really seeing a trend. Like, when we do, we roll out the program, but we also have seminars, and they're packed. I mean, people really, I think we're living in a device world, right? It's driven. We're all on our devices for how many hours? 150 times a day. We check our cell phone. Like, this is what's.
That's now classified as a mental disorder,
It is also a mental disorder, yes.
So let me ask you,
Screenitis.
Are you seeing positive outcomes, and how do you measure that?
Yeah, we have a PSS score for, so we look at stress, and we look at the reduction in stress. We look at improvements in productivity, and we're partnering with a large productivity data firm on that. And then we do look at CBT reduction, GAD reduction. GAD's a measure of anxiety, CBT is a reduction in depression. So there are scores for these things, but I think mindfulness is really openly discussed. And I even think, I know there's a stigma, I agree with Lisa, there's some stigma, but it's changing. The conversation is changing.
I think it's shifting slowly in the right direction, I feel. Resiliency is a word that's been quite used, so it's almost like building the muscle, and the same way building the muscle for the brain. So yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think, this is also the interesting thing about, in terms of how do you get people to raise their hand, the interesting thing about having a lot of players who are, going through mostly the employer channel, to some extent the payer channel, trying to get the attention of people to use their tools and the attention of the people who need it. But I know, with the example of Big Health, where they're doing cognitive behavioral therapy with the primary focus on insomnia, cognitive behavioral therapy serves a whole lot of conditions, anxiety, depression, and others. And so that company uses their, the fact that it's just sleep. And everybody talks all the time about, I never sleep enough. My husband snores and I never get enough sleep. And so they go into an employed population and just say, if you'd like, take a sleep quiz, find out about the health of your sleep, something very low stigma, and kind of can create breadcrumbs that way through something that's kind of intriguing and interesting and low stigma. And through that service of cognitive behavioral therapy, if somebody does sign up for it, may be addressing anxiety. They may be addressing something that's entirely separate from what somebody initially raised their hand for. So I think there are these kind of Trojan horse models that can help us overcome where stigma and lack of trust still exist. Yeah. And I'd say, I know, within KP as a healthcare provider, we're struggling with this and trying to figure out sort of what is the right way for us to help people raise their hand in a provider setting. There is a flip side to this, and this isn't KP specific, but which is because this whole area of mental health care has not been paid for by the healthcare industry for a long time up until relatively recently. Therapy has been delivered as something that you go to for your entire life. And like, what's the outcome? In the healthcare setting, that's an uncomfortable question, right? Like we take care of you to get better, and then you're better, and you stop getting care because you're better. So I do think that there is a maturation on both sides that has to happen in order for coverage to catch up. And there are some interesting tools on that front. There's a company called Tritium that is really focused on how can you understand if somebody is benefiting from the care they're receiving. And it's not structured in a way of like, okay, so that we can just stop it after some amount of time, but rather, if you are getting better, this is the way we can know, and at least have some insight into whether what the care that we're giving you is beneficial. And so then we can have confidence that this is working, and we'd give it to more people, that sort of thing. So it's
Iodine was another company that got acquired by GoodRx, which was focused on that, is patients reporting their experience initially with medications, behavioral health medications. This one worked for me, this one didn't. These were the side effects, these were the experiences. And I think that kind of thing, I mean, if you're gonna start a psychotropic drug, it's a really good website to look at, because it's almost like Yelp, and it says, you can read the reviews of people who've experienced these medications, and that really is, at this point in time, the only fundamentally reliable way to understand outcome. I mean, there isn't, you can do, functional MRIs, but nobody's gonna pay for that, right? So at the moment, I think relying on that patient-centered data is really essential in finding ways to feed that back, because employers, payers, whomever, brief intermittent therapy was pioneered at Kaiser, actually, short-term therapy, back in the 70s and 80s. It's lost, it kind of lost its way, and it's come back as CBT, whatever. But I think the opportunity to make this a better paid benefit is to find ways of measuring, because frankly, we spend a lot of money on treatments that don't help people, and I think it really frustrates those payers, and I don't blame them. They wouldn't pay for that stuff if it was for diabetes or cardiovascular disorders.
So you took the question that I had down the list, is like patient-reported outcome data. Are you investing in something like that solution at this time, or you're seeing more investment going in that direction? And almost kind of picking up on the tail end of what you were saying is the ROI. How do you as investors who look at like 18-month exit strategy or kind of returns in investment, invest in behavioral health? Because that is a maintenance line. That is, you don't have an end game to this. Almost like you were saying physical therapy, you have 12 sessions, the shoulder is better, patient is out, they can strengthen themselves on their own. With mental health, there is no end to it. This, like you mentioned, that there will be peaks and troughs that would keep on happening. How do you invest?
Same with the shoulder. I have a bad shoulder. It's bugged me for 30 years on and off, so I don't think it's any different. But really, I think we've invested in Evidation, and what they do is help companies, pharmaceutical companies, med tech companies, collect patient in real world evidence. So we played it a little bit different way. We went with the picks and shovels model, but they are working with numerous pharma companies and digital health companies that are working specifically on feeding back this type of information about drugs in development, about medical devices in development, et cetera. So I think there's huge demand for this data right now. It's clear. I'm seeing it across lots of companies on the manufacturing side.
I just want to say that this, we want to make this interactive. It looks like, how much time do we have? Oh, okay. So we are supposed to have a mic there. But we really want to make this open, so anybody who has a question.
Can I squeeze in a quick question?
Oh, no, I'm just saying to prepare for them.
Me too.
Yeah.
Not hashtag me too. But would you defer or not invest in a company that's like a Me Too? Because there's a lot of Me. I mean, we saw the whole spectrum that Bambi shared with us, and it could be toxic.
289 startups in mental health,
Yeah.
not including the substance abuse ones that have been funded in the last 10 years in digital health.
So you wouldn't stop.
289.
Okay.
You
That's
would,
a
I'm sorry,
lot.
you would? You wouldn't?
It's tough, man.
Oh.
I don't know how anybody gets any market share. That's
Well,
tough.
and that brings me to the question is, a primary care physician doesn't stop opening their office just because there's other primary care physicians. So would you look at this space almost in that way, that there is plenty of work that needs to be done? And if there is a Me Too that is really solving the access issue or outcome issue, you would invest in that? I
You're
mean,
asking me
no,
specifically?
no, I'm asking all of you. It's like, did you defer an investment potentially because it was a Me Too?
I think that there are a lot of twists. Usually it's not a straight up copy. It's a special twist, and at the early stage it's all about execution. So if you have something that you think has traction, that's fine. I think the comparison to any physician, so and this needs to be venture backable and needs to be venture growth characteristics with venture exits. So in that respect, yeah, there's going to be several trying that, and you're going to have to bet on who you believe has the best twist on the thing. And that can be sometimes a fairly minor change. I mean, you could try something that is very similar to what's out there already, and then put a twist on it, all of a sudden it works. And so I really believe that there's a lot of room out there, and even if you get to a certain point that somebody has. So in other words, I don't believe this is a Facebook type of outcome. There shall be one, and that shall be the firm that rules your world and informs everyone about your social life. So I think it's going to be much more fragmented. So is healthcare too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just think it depends on the moat. If one of those 289 companies has created some sort of competitive advantage that makes it harder for the 290th to actually succeed, I think that's the case. I think oftentimes Hubert's right. It's a lot about execution. It's a lot about where you are in the cycle. I mean, one of the reasons Kaiser invested in Ginger. I mean, we seeded it, and per Liz's point, a lot of learnings there. But one of the moats there was the data. I mean, they were collecting so much data that if there was a Me Too or a Me 3 or a Me 4, there would be a competitive disadvantage for that fourth or fifth player to come in, given all the sheer amount of data that's been collected. So that's an example of a moat of something that we'd be either excited about or fearful of.
Sorry to cut you off. On the Ginger example, there's also it's worth understanding if you are a Me Too of something that has not found a market. That is worthwhile. It doesn't mean the market won't be here today, but if somebody didn't find it a few years back, it's useful to understand why and understand why you're different, because especially if you are seeking venture capital, many of those venture investors will know that story of just sort of the pivot that organization had to make, or if it got shut down. But I think that there's also just we feel pretty strongly at KP Ventures that there can be lots of entrants in a market. We differentiate on data, on evidence. And so evidence, not just meaning evidence of outcomes that you've actually done, whether it's clinical trials or whatever it is you need to do to prove out your outcomes, but also that people will actually adopt you and that they'll actually engage with you. And these are lessons that we've learned from some of the leaders around KP, and one of which you'll get to hear from later today, where that is what it actually takes to succeed in our health system. And so even if a company can get kind of fast revenue or fast growth without those things, we're pretty cautious, because that could be a Me Too that kind of fizzles out. And many of them will prove us wrong, but that's the thesis that we've taken that kind of aligns us with the way that we see our colleagues around KP evaluating some of these offerings.
But I think the biggest challenge, among the biggest challenges, is distribution. Because most people do not feel comfortable taking their medical decisions into their own hands. They want a physician or a psychologist or a psychiatrist or somebody, a social worker, whoever, somebody qualified, to tell them this is valid and this is a good thing to do and it won't hurt you. And getting to those people cannot be done through the employers. And the employers, by the way, are getting really tired of buying 47 niche products, one for mental health and one for your left toenail and one for your wrist, because that's what they're doing, and they're really frustrated. So I think one of the things that a lot of the mental health companies have not taken advantage of is the distribution through the large payers like Magellan and Beacon and United Behavioral Health that cover literally tens of millions of behavioral health patients and don't, and are the distribution point for a lot of these things. And a lot of them never even heard of these companies.
I agree. And I'll go back to the very beginning, and we have a question here, so we'll get to your question next. I'll drop the mic. You're next. So flattening access is crucial. I would never go and make an appointment with a dietitian, but I saw one recently. And why? Because my physician has a dietitian, and it was easy. And finally, being a guy, because it was email, I was able to make an appointment, and I actually saw her, and now I know a few things. And it took like pulling teeth out of me. My wife didn't even make me do it. I did it myself. But
Good for you.
yeah, Chris, I'm so proud. But what I'm trying to say is, imagine there's that button on the Amazon website, the 100 million of us, that says, would you like an assessment? This is perfectly just between you. This is not going to be data that's shared. Would you like to learn something about yourself today? How many people do you think would do? I think a lot of people would do it, and they would learn. And we have flattened access to something, and now the next step is easier, and the next step is easier, and maybe then eventually you come to a point where it says, how about a subscription to have these chats every week? Well, I totally believe it. Flattening access and letting people gain insights is going to be one. There may be a point at which a red flag goes up and says, you need some serious help. So why don't you call someone?
Okay, so Lisa, hi, I'm Yael Swerdlow. I'm the CEO and founder of Maestro Games. Lisa, you completely hit my point, which is if you are going to self-diagnose and you're in the throes of a depression, that's going to skew the symptoms and the things that you punch into, say, Google search or WebMD or something. To your point about flattening the access, there is a level of disconnecting danger here, let's say, of be self-diagnosing when you're in the throes of something, and we all have done that Google search, right? Oh, I have a sore on my foot. Oh God, it's cancer. At least I do that. I'm a proctologist's daughter. You don't want to know. But anyway, so what I'm wondering about is how do you address that in your investments? Do you look at that? Are you concerned
About the distribution issue, you mean?
the distribution issue with regard to self-diagnosis and the dangers in that?
When I look at investing in these kinds of companies, looking at the things that Liz said, traction, there's uptake and results, evidence that it works. Those are the two, and that the business model is sustainable and all that other stuff we look at. But in terms of the first things I want to know before I even do anything else is, is there any evidence that you're getting people better? And is there any evidence that you're really attracting lots of customers and they're using it? Because a lot of these programs have lots of customers and no utilization. And thirdly, is it saving money overall for the buyer? Because that's going to be how they decide to pay for it or not, mostly. So that's the first three screens for me.
I want to ask about, an investment opportunity.
You should go to the mic.
You should go, yeah. Better help.
Well, as he gets to the mic, let me ask a quick question about a new opportunity. If you remember the slide that I had there, we had a number of companies that are providing access to licensed therapies, and then a number that are more self-directed apps or just medical devices and wearables. But we talked a lot about how do we engage the user, how do we get them to raise their hand, how do we get people to come together. And I was speaking to the CEO of Sutter Mental Health, and he said, there's a breakdown in society, sort of the breakdown, and we need community. Which is why I'm really excited about some of these companies that are going to be presenting. In all my research that I've been looking, I'm looking for these guys, and I'm interested to know if you think that's an interesting area, because if we can create communities around ourselves, those are the people who are going to push us to get better, right? Family and friends. Technology is helping to recreate communities. And are you seeing that? And is that something that you would find interesting?
So I've seen, Amber, I think your company did invest in Docent Health, and their listeners that you had, you were engaging, not so much the health coaches in a way.
Yeah,
is that what you were asking for? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I think Docent doesn't necessarily use the community model, as I think as you're defining it in terms of a group of peers or a group of like-minded survivors or things of that sort.
AA on steroids.
Yeah, you know, AA. We don't use that. We think about a patient journey in that case, and you know, and connect them to someone who can help them navigate the patient journey for maternity or for ortho or things of that sort. But the community idea is interesting. I mean, like the real question behind that, we're all for it, depending on the screens of efficacy. But it's who would pay for that, right? Because sometimes it's a little bit more of a model. But I want to make sure that there's time for the last two questions.
Thanks. My name is Alam Tas. I'm the founder of BetterHelp. We're an online counseling platform. And I want to ask about the business model, because I've kind of noticed that all your investments, 100% of them are paid by the payer, and none of them are paid by the consumer. So my question is, have you given up on consumers paying for their mental health when in a world we're only relying on peers paying for that?
I've given up.
Definitely not. We could have a healthy debate in the 15 seconds. No, I think what we've seen is a resurgence of consumers being willing to spend on health. You can look on the spectrum that Bambi put on her slide. I'll talk fast because we're running out of time. But you look at mindfulness, you look at Headspace, Calm, Simple Habit, those folks. Those are real businesses. A lot of them are direct to consumer, all in the tens, if not higher, of millions of revenue. On the other side, you know, Oak and Maverick were investors in One Medical. People are paying subscription services for that. Ford, even more so, you know, with so even at a higher price point. You look at direct-to-consumer spend on things like Nurx or Hims, you know, outside of the payer universe, direct-to-consumer for convenience, access. I think it's a contrarian viewpoint. People may disagree, but I do think there's a resurgence of it.
And it's tough, and it's happening in the destigmatization that happens by some of these businesses that are going to the payers, I think will also unlock more availability for the direct-to-consumer over time.
We'll have to take the next question because it's already 7:55. So.
Hi, Jonathan Romanowski. My question is on the other extreme: patients who are depressed in the system, maybe even bouncing in and out of institutionalized care, very expensive for themselves and for their employers. For patients like that, would something like a functional MRI or other sort of expensive solutions be something that you think would sort of the venture world would be willing to invest, where there's a clear...
Well, that's for diagnostic functional MRI.
Absolutely,
But
correct.
you mean for treatment?
Probably I guess my question was really in the mindset of diagnostic, knowing that current treatments are so ineffective. You know, 30% of patients really have treatments work. So
outcome.
Well, there are treatments. I mean, if you know that about that person, you already know, right? I think it's more than how do you break the cycle with treatment. And there are interesting treatments that have come around for people like that, like Neuronetics, which is a bioelectronic medicine type of thing, non-invasive, that treats people who have severe depression and don't respond to drugs.
TMS is transmagnetic cranial therapy.
And Freespira that treats panic disorder and PTSD with breathing techniques that seem to cure it. I mean, it's remarkable. So I think there are companies being invested in these areas dealing with more severe mental illness challenges, but there are not a lot of them out there.
But we like companies that will take on expensive problems and manage them more effectively. So solutions that figure that out are very exciting, I think.
Isn't not a lot out there good? You just said that there were too many of the other
There's
types.
too many focused on the low end of the spectrum, and there's not enough focused on the more acute, chronic, you know, the more acute in terms of difficult and the more chronic illness type of mental health conditions. Ironically, it is paid for because most of that's covered by people on Medicaid, or oftentimes it is, and still the treatments are very poor.
It always happens that this panel goes over. The last time this was 40 minutes, then we made it 45 minutes, now we made it 55 minutes, and it's still over. So I'm sorry, but we have to end it here. And I want to bring up one of our sponsors, Anthony Schell.
Hi,
Obviously, these guys are staying for the rest of the time, and we have a break. But first, Anthony.
Thank you, Bambi, and thank you to the panelists and to Archana and to Fran. Amazing panel as always.
Thank you.
As you're enjoying your wine and cheese, please be sure to check out the HP Salon area in the back with the demos. The recent technologies will be taking place related to the topics we're discussing here, the mental and behavioral health, including the recent virtual reality and behavioral modification tools that we have behind us. So please check those out as you're having your hors d'oeuvres. Quickly, I'm the office space guy. I help technology companies early and mid-stage with their facilities planning, leasing, and I always think about these panels when I come to these events and thinking about office space and what role do tech companies and companies in general planning for healthy and mentally healthy employees, and how can we plan office space better. And I was struck by something that Billy mentioned about what if we just looked at mental health as being healthy. It wasn't just going to the gym to keep your body healthy, but is your mind healthy. And in the coming months, I'll be working on a piece of content along with Bambi and Vator that will be related to the role that employers have in keeping their employees healthy through office space design. So be on the lookout for that. And please enjoy the break and the hors d'oeuvres. And thank you very much.
And be back here at 7:15.